As you see, as you've looked at the program for this afternoon, this last panel of the day is structured a little bit differently. The focus of this last panel is on inaction, moving forward, next steps. Where do we go from here? There's been lots of great information, good discussion. And as I said at the beginning of the day, part of the intent of this session is to create a space for some conversation. And so this last session is the place where that conversation will become a little broader and a little more inclusive of all of you who are here today, both in Billings and at our satellite sites as well. Let me say a little bit about what that process is going to look like, and then I will introduce our panelists for this session. The beginning of this session will look essentially the same as the earlier panels today. We've got 4 panelists who will each make some formal comments. And then things will change up a little bit. At that point, we are going to ask you to form up into some small groups, one group at each one of the tables. We've posed or crafted some questions, and I'll describe this process a little bit in more detail when we get to that point of the session. But there'll be an opportunity for you to have some conversations at each one of your tables and at each of the satellite sites. And we'll ask each of the groups, each of the tables to choose, hopefully more or less democratically, a person to be your recorder/reporter to collect the sort of major themes, concerns, ideas that emerge out of your conversations. We'll do a little round-robin summary out of those conversations after about a half hour, 25 minutes of conversation. And then we'll give our panelists an opportunity to reflect a little bit on what those themes are. So again, this is sort of the opportunity for you to begin to talk a little bit more amongst yourselves about enactment, about moving forward and next steps. So let me tell you who's joining me, or maybe more accurately, whom I am joining on the panel this afternoon. Kind of working from my left to right, I'm joined by Christine Lux, who is an assistant professor in the Department of Health and Human Development at MSU. Christine is the program leader for early childhood education and childhood services, the academic program at MSU, and is also the chair of the Early Childhood Education Consortium, which is a group of faculty members from campuses across the state who meet periodically and interact to collaborate and advocate for early childhood issues. To Christine's left, we have Sally Tillman, who is the preschool development grant coordinator at DPHHS. As the grant coordinator, she works on joint implementation between the governor's office, OPI, and DPHHS. Sally earned her bachelor's degree in social work from the University of Montana and has worked in a variety of child serving agencies through her career. Did I just get that backwards? I got that out of order, didn't I? No, I'm good. Okay, man. Libby Hancock is to Sally's left. Libby is the director of the Early Childhood Project at MSU, which is an outreach project within the Department of Health and Human Development that developed and administers the Montana Early Care and Education Career Development Program, which builds knowledge and skilled and stable early childhood workforce and serves young children and families around the state. And then finally, Dennis Parman at the far left of the table is the Deputy Superintendent of the Office of Public Instruction. Dennis has got nearly 40 years of experience in Montana as a teacher, a principal, including here in Billings, and also as a district superintendent in Shelby. He spent the last 5 years at OPI, and we are grateful to have all 4 of these panelists join us this afternoon. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Christine.
Good afternoon. I hope that you're enjoying cookies and keeping your energy up. And I'm really excited that we'll have some time for conversation. So I wanted to share a little bit, thank you, Sally. I want to share a little bit of background information on what the Early Childhood Higher Ed Consortium is. Some of my fellow faculty from across the state are here in this audience. Some are joining us from our satellite sites, and some couldn't participate today. So I'm hoping that I capture our collective vision accurately. But just to give you a little bit of background, as Eric mentioned in my bio, we meet throughout the year at least once per semester to come together. And as I mentioned, this is faculty from 4-year and 2-year institutions, both community colleges, tribal colleges, and institutions within the MUS system. And we share the same values and vision for what we believe about early childhood education, that we define early childhood as birth through age 8. And we know that it's a very unique time in a child and family's life. And we know that we have a great responsibility to build a highly qualified workforce. And that's not just teachers in classroom settings who have a very important role, as we all know, but we also work very hard to think about how we're building foundational knowledge for a number of different kinds of professional positions. Some of you may be familiar with a recent report by the Institute of Medicine and the National Research Council called Transforming the Workforce, which is focused on highly qualified workforce preparation for those working with young children and their families, and Libby will mention a little bit about that as well. We brought this up at our last Higher Ed Consortium meeting just to look at some general principles. There's certainly a lot to say about higher education, but again, it's looking at workforce development for a range of early childhood professionals and what our commonalities are and how we can work together. And that's really what our consortium does. I've been chair now for one meeting. I've led one meeting. And my colleagues who came before me set the bar very high. When I came to Montana in 2008, I was immediately struck by the sense of community and the sense of partnership and collaboration and the sense of opportunity. And hearing from my colleagues, who I consider dear friends now, it has been an ongoing fight for advocacy for work with young children. And when we had in this past year a lot of really exciting accomplishments, we had a lot to celebrate. And when I looked at my colleagues, I said, great, and I shared this last night at dinner, I said, what's my good next thing that I'm gonna do in the next 25 years, which is incredibly exciting, right? So I'm still newish enough to Montana to really think about what this next phase is gonna be like, and I'm thrilled to be able to help provide some facilitation to our higher ed group. Our group is sponsored by, facilitated by the Early Childhood Project, so I don't want to underscore that great relationship that we have. We couldn't do the work or hold our meetings or bring people from across the state together without the Early Childhood Project. So for that, we're very thankful. Because of that relationship, we're able to be called upon for our expertise for a number of different projects across the state. Sometimes that's to attend stakeholder meetings, to provide our very passionate judgment about things that are happening in the state and things that we'd like to see happen differently, to provide input on administrative rule. That was really significant in this past year around our preschool to grade 3 teaching endorsement, providing that insight, using our professional knowledge base and really building off of those standards, but then also thinking about those program standards, really recognizing the real need to engage school leadership, to really think about school principals and school superintendents within their plan of learning, within their own degree programs. How much time are they spending really talking about and understanding early childhood? And I'll put it out there, I don't think they have much time to talk about that and learn about that, and that's something that we want to change. And so we know that that's an opportunity, and that's something that our Early Childhood Higher Ed Consortium group, that's part of our agenda for this particular year, is to think about how we can convene school leadership groups, certainly working in partnership with the Preschool Development Grant. Those leadership groups are already coming together, so we've got to capitalize on those moments as well. Some other things that our Higher Ed Consortium has done, we work on and think about the integration of our programs across the state. So we want to think about what our 2-year community and tribal-based systems, how they're preparing early childhood professionals and how to build on those skills. We don't want students then to come to finish off a bachelor's degree and repeat a whole bunch of coursework. We want to make it accessible. We want to make things meaningful and intentional and really build off of what our professionals' experiences have been, because we know that that's going to reach a broader audience of children and families and support those healthy outcomes. The point that I guess I'm trying to make is that we work together in many different ways. We don't always see things, the path to getting someplace in exactly the same way, and that's because we represent different communities, and that's okay. We all are learning from one another. But the fact is that we can bring our early childhood higher ed stakeholders together and be sitting around one conference table, which is really nice. I come from Massachusetts. I graduated in Boston, where I feel like even in my like little corner of a neighborhood, you couldn't all fit around a conference table. So we can do that, which is really exciting. So that means that we can really get some things done. And again, having had the opportunity to work with state level leadership has been really exciting. We continue to expand our reach and think about those invitations to all of our higher ed partners, because we want everyone's voice to be heard, and we're building that. And those relationships take time to develop, but we're getting there, which is really exciting. I had mentioned to you our shared value system about this uniqueness of early childhood. And again, just to reiterate, because I think that we teach in higher ed when we're working with our students that repetition with young children is really important, so I kind of model that. So you'll hear a lot of things repeated here on this panel from what you've been hearing all day, and that's okay. Sometimes you need to hear it in someone else's voice. Early childhood is birth through age 8, and we heard earlier, I believe it was Mary Jane that talked about early Head Start and thinking about prenatal health and thinking about even before children are born, we're thinking about opportunities, we're thinking about resource, we're thinking about support, not just for that child, but for that family. If we're thinking about healthy outcomes, we can't do that without thinking about the family's impact and how we can enact a theory of change. A video that I often show to my students, and again, I show it to them many times because we think about it and reflect on it differently, comes from the Center on the Developing Child at Harvard. And it's a theory of change video. And it's not about being reactive and responsive to children who are experiencing trauma, it's about empowering adults. Those adults could be parents, they could be caregivers, they can be any early childhood professional who's working with children as a specialist, as a counselor, as a social worker, as an intake coordinator, as a pediatrician, anyone who has an important role in the life of that child and family has an opportunity to be empowered with the skills and knowledge and opportunity to ask questions, to learn more about that family and about that community, to figure out how to support development. We think about the things that make early childhood different and unique are our perspectives on how children learn and develop, that we know that they learn through movement and they learn through play, and that this shouldn't be lost or gone as children enter into our school systems, that we should really celebrate those aspects of learning and development. We should continue to find ways to engage families and not just check that off our list and say, family's engaged, and now what do we do with them for the remainder of that child's life? Because those children are going to grow up and hopefully have families of their own and continue to strengthen our community. So we need to think about across that lifespan how we're supporting families, and we do that by getting an early start. We also think about how we provide guidance and encouragement to young children when they're in our care. And again, I think, was it Mary Jane that said this earlier too, about we teach about how to care for children and how to care for families and look out for their well-being. And I think that's a really important sentiment. And it's not that in school systems, and once a child reaches 8 years in one day, we suddenly don't care about them. But we need to keep that sentiment, and we need to keep that theme persistent throughout. Otherwise, our work and our efforts that are put in place really early on, we can't really capitalize on those. When we think about the uniqueness and the difference of early childhood, this is the part of the work we do in Higher Ed Consortium, is thinking about why we chose the standards that we did for our teacher licensure, why we chose the standards that we did for the preschool programs, why we chose those standards, and how that made an impact to our career path and career development, thinking about individuals who are working with infants and toddlers and preschoolers who may never have a desire to work in the public school system. We support those individuals because they have a great contribution to our professional workforce. But we think about those standards, and we think about how we're working together, that these are thoughtful, sequenced experiences in higher education. It's not just learning content, it's providing a context in the field to be able to learn and practice skills. We see learners at many different stages of their own professional development and personal development. Some students that come to higher ed right after high school. We're looking at dual enrollment opportunities, and some of that is happening across the state. We can do that in a more articulated way, and that's one of our goals this year. We're engaging with our family consumer science outreach in Helena, and also thinking about in our local communities how we can engage those family consumer science teachers, particularly those teaching child development, for example, at the high school level. How can we bolster that experience and then bring those folks on to higher ed with some incoming credits, because that helps to build that foundation. But that field experience is really important as well, and for many of our learners in higher ed, and this is across our state systems, they've been working in programs, right? They are professionals, they have families, and they have been very successful in the work that they're doing. And when we're looking at really improving and valuing the work that we do as early childhood professionals, keeping our profession moving forward, we're asserting and standing pretty firm on this idea that a degree is critically important for a number of different reasons. That degree affords you the opportunity for mentorship, ongoing, not just when you graduate, but then you build that professional learning community, you build that community of practice, you have a network where you have had an opportunity to reflect and engage. Your perceptions change over time. Your own experiences change how you view the things that you're learning about. Even if you've been caring for young children and their families for years and years and years, it's really important to have that carefully sequenced, intentional higher ed experience that leads to a degree. It leads to something really to be proud of, and not just because you're going through the motions, but because you value that education piece too. And to be able to have that degree in place, what will come along with that is that the pay, the parity in pay, and looking at how we value our education, how we're preparing ourselves in our profession is going to have some other outcomes to it that's going to continue to advance our profession forward. Thank you. And so I'm hoping that in our discussions we'll have some more time to delve more deeply into some specific questions you might have about P3, but I didn't want, bless you, I didn't want my talk to be just focused to P3, because that's not what early childhood is. Early childhood is much broader than that. Certainly that's a big piece of what we're doing, but be thinking about, and I hope that you can, your takeaway from me can be that we think about a range of professional positions and careers that we're preparing individuals for at the higher ed level. And I'm proud to have been part of many of those initiatives. I have a foot in both worlds as a licensed K-8 teacher, but then certainly as a preschool director and administrator, and now getting to work with big people and little people, which is very exciting. So I'm learning a lot all the time. But I hope that throughout this panel and through your discussion, generate those questions, because I'd like to inform you about some of the specifics about programs and so forth, but that also can be done in an email and as things are kind of put out in different places. But I want this to be more emotive. I want this to be more, what you think about, why we're passionate about what we do. So thank you so much.
Well, I do want to thank you for being invited to come to the table to talk about this really exciting stuff about how to strengthen education for our youngest Montanans. When I first got asked to be part of the panel, I thought, wow, what do I have to offer? I looked at the credentials of people on the panels and the folks that were invited to the table, and I thought to myself, well, you're part of a preschool development grant. And development is the key word, right? It's taking some of those concerns, as I heard folks talk about today, the concerns that they have about this process, and we're going to give it a shot. We're going to see how we can tackle it. And that means we don't have all the answers. That means we're just starting to try to put things into place, and then what needs to be changed, or how do we move forward. So I am going to speak specifically to the grant, just because that's my knowledge base, but also because I think it gives us an idea of what we're kind of tackling, and maybe some of the areas within the grant we did, the folks that wrote it thought were important. So again, it is improving access to high quality preschool. And that's a really key piece, is that quality piece. There's a lot of elements of the grant that folks got together at the tables and talked about and said, how do we make sure that we're not just providing preschool, but it's quality. We are focused in this grant on 4-year-olds, although we, like everybody else, understand that learning begins at birth. But we are focusing on 4-year-olds in this grant. We do serve 16 programs, which might branch out to about 21 communities, and at this time, 26 classrooms. So that's the first cohort. 7 of those 16 programs are on Indian country. So we're excited about that. We really are trying to reach out and see what we can do across the whole state. The grant does happen in both Head Start classrooms as well as school-based classrooms. Public school. We have 13 Head Start and 3 in the public school. Some really great things are happening as we are coming together to support our youngest children and focusing on their education, meeting them just exactly where they are at. We are getting some really great conversations happening. And to me, that's the best part about the development grant, are the conversations that are happening. As the grant was written, some hard work was done. I came on after the grant, but I will tell you that I've heard folks talk about the hard work and the hard, purposeful communication that needed to happen amongst all of the groups, from our early care providers all the way up to our higher ed folks, getting together and saying we have to have unified supportive language so that we can all support each other's work, because no one can do it alone. And that is super exciting to me, that that kind of work really happened and it's purposeful. And that supportive piece is really, to me, where it's at. As we discussed earlier, we talked about not only recognizing the quality, but improving the quality in our early childhood systems. And so a lot of work has happened, just like was talked about earlier, but with the chapter standards, 57, 58, and 63. Our Head Start standards that are, also working, and our Stars to Quality programs, right? The work is out there, and we're saying we want quality in all of our systems, and how can we help support each other and support the work that everybody's doing for our children 0 to 5, 0 to 8, 0 to 21, really. Some of the direct service work that's happening out there with the grant, I think, is kind of a unique piece. There are regional specialists. There are 10 of them across the state of Montana, and they're regionally placed, 5 of which are from the Department of Health and Human Services, and 5 are with Office of Public Instruction. And so I think with those individuals comes some really unique knowledge base, right? We have the K-12 knowledge as well as that really early childhood knowledge. And each program gets supported by one person from each program. So we are saying all systems are important. Even though we have good quality programs out there, we can always get better. And so those regional specialists are working with their leadership teams. That's their main focus. They're working to say, how do the leadership teams going to focus on improving the quality, putting standards into their work, meeting the needs of all these youth, and then what's the sustainability piece once the grant is no longer here. So that, we agree. Earlier we heard the keynote speaker talking about skilled leaders. That's exactly where it's at. We're saying you have to have strong leaders at the top to help the folks in the classroom. The Prescope Development Grant looks at all domains of learning, and that includes child guidance, environment, and family and community engagement. And as we've heard earlier, lots of programs already have this rich into their programming, and I would argue that schools do as well. They're just open now to even improving that. I don't think that our schools ever weren't interested in this. It's just now something that they're saying, you know what, we need to look at it even further. And those conversations are happening, and we're excited about it. As well as having the regional staff that are Start State people, the programs each have coaches and family engagement coordinators. And those coaches are kind of going on like based on the system that Jamie talked about earlier this morning about that coaching model and how you have to have continuous improvement cycles and supporting each other, supporting the teachers in their work. And that is purposeful and hard work, and it's really important. And those family engagement coordinators, they are really tackling those tough issues like parent involvement, best practices in eating, and for some of our programs where you're new to having 4-year-olds in your program, what is the best way to feed 4-year-olds? What is the best kind of environment that we should have out there for those kids to make learning happen? How should rooms be structured? How should families be engaged in the educational process? And they really are doing that slow but purposeful meaning work with the programs to say, let's just have some really rich conversations about them. We can't move mountains overnight, but we can start the conversation. And that's kind of, to me, what this whole day is about, is the conversation and how do we move it forward by hearing some of those differences and tackling some of those really tough conversations. In addition, the family engagement coordinator does some of that community work, and they bridge out. I think that was another neat piece to the grant that the people that wrote the grant brought in, is said, you know what, without community work and our community partners, we're not going to be able to sustain this work. And we're also not going to hear about all the rich work that's out there and happening. So family engagement coordinators are required to be part of their local coalitions. And I believe people out in the communities are part of those coalitions. And that's where additionally, I hope we hear voices from our families, right? Those first educators of our children. I hope they're taking part in those coalitions and voicing their needs and what their concerns are. And we're hoping that through time there will be an expansion of coalitions, that as this work goes on, people say, you know what, we don't have a coalition in our community and we would like one. This grant is advised by the Best Beginnings Advisory Council. It is a council made up of partnering stakeholders, and it has a shared vision. And I'm going to read the vision because I could never talk to it over off the top of my head. But this was a governor-driven coalition, and the goal is ensure Montana has a comprehensive, coordinated early childhood system that provides a governance structure and leads to strong collaboration in order to best meet needs of Montana's youngest citizens. And that's bringing people from across the state, across all of the spectrum of early childhood care, all the way up to the higher ed folks, state workers, local providers, you name it, grants that are special in Montana, and saying we need to come to the table and we need to talk about some of our tough issues. And they oversee and give some advisory issues on lots of our grants in the state of Montana right now, but preschool development is one of them. And some of the things the work of this Best Beginnings Advisory Council has done, and we hope to do, is like they helped determine what kind of assessments would be used for the youth in the classrooms around the preschool development grant. And so, like, they chose the class as one of the assessment tools, and they chose the ECHRs. So all programs are having outside assessors coming in and providing support and assessing their classrooms and in those areas to say what ways could they improve. And so that's kind of a neat piece of this grant. We also are really encouraged and are working hard to recruit parents to be a part of that Best Beginnings Advisory Council, because like all the conversations we've had earlier, without the parent voice, we're not getting the full picture. So we really, truly are hopeful that we can get more parents involved in that. And then part of that Best Beginning Advisory Council, the grant supports financially some of the local coalitions. So the state has 20 local coalitions right now. 16 have chosen to be part of and supported by some funding from the preschool development grant, because the grant writers realized how important it was to have the stakeholders and the people on the ground supporting this work. Currently, right now, going out in all of the communities that have coalitions should be a survey that's addressed to really trying to find out what the accessibility needs are or accessibility issues are for folks wanting their kids in preschool. So we're hopeful we get some kind of interesting information back on that. But that's some of the work that they are doing to support the grant. The grant also talks a lot about increasing our workforce and supporting professional developments for all of the providers in the grant communities. And so that's kind of a neat piece. We're saying not only the folks that are working in the classrooms of the grant, but people that provide care for our children and educate our children outside of those grant classrooms. You also have the opportunity to get education paid for through this grant, because we want Montana to be the very best we can be, and we know that honoring the work you do in your own private settings, and if we can support that, will just better and further the work of the state of Montana. So we're proud of that. There are several other things. So if we want to require the degree, we have to pay for the degree, at least as for the length of the grant. So there are several, there are lots of pieces about the grant, and I'm just going to kind of wrap up in saying that we're excited about what comes out of the development of the grant, and we're excited that the players are coming together at the table, and we're not going to do it all right, and we're not afraid of hearing things that we're doing wrong, because that's the only way we can improve on. So thank you very much for inviting us to the table.
Good afternoon. Are there some sleepy people out there? It's kind of nap time in my early childhood world. Have a brownie, might help. Well, good afternoon, and it's quite thrilling to be in this room. I have been in many rooms like this over my decade-long career in early childhood education, and I always am honored to be in a group of people with my colleagues and many of you out there as well. I love being on the last panel because pretty much everything's been said that I wanted to say. So I'm going to really try to add a little bit more to this very important, difficult, challenging conversation that we're having in Montana about the future of early childhood education. I am one of those rare people who started my career as an undergraduate in child development and preschool education. And I'm not even going to tell you how many decades ago it was. But I have remained true to that passion of mine. And somewhere along the way, I said, ooh, this is a sinking ship. I'm going to bail. And went over to elementary education, went back to school, and got my teaching endorsement for the state of Montana as well. But my passion is early childhood, and so I came back. And I don't think the ship is sinking. I think it's floating, I think it's shifting, I think it's turning in new and wonderful directions for our state, and it's very exciting to be a part of that. So I'm just going to reflect a little bit on the title of this last panel, which is Enacting Shared Visions, Missions, and Values, and our next steps for enhancing capacity in our state. I'm going to start out with shared missions because I know that every single person in this room represents an organization or an entity or a school or a program in the state of Montana that has a mission, and I'm pretty sure every single one of those mission statements talks about young children and services for families. What I want to say about that is all of those mission statements are critically important, and how many of us have sat around a table trying to craft those mission statements, which is really tedious and deadly work, but highly important. So I guess I'm challenging us about our mission as a state. I think we've heard today that we're all committed to moving this forward, this whole issue of early childhood education, and really focusing on the birth to age 8 period of time in a child's life. However, I do think that we need to really, really challenge ourselves right now. I think we are at a turning point. I loved Bill's comments about a changing culture and about tension points and about stakeholders and about communicating, and how it really is all about relationships. And some of the really great things that are happening in the state of Montana are a result of us sitting around tables, getting to know each other, getting to know our missions, getting to know our worries and our concerns about young children and families in the state of Montana. That's really where it starts. I know that my organization, our organization at the Early Childhood Project at Montana State University, and I do want to say kudos to Montana State University for the Wheeler Center for sponsoring this event, and for my Department of Health and Human Development within the College of Education, Health, and Human Development for supporting the work of the Early Childhood Project since 1985. And we have never really wavered from our original mission, which was to improve services for young children and families all across the state. So we've been a statewide organization for that long. That doesn't mean there's any kind of status quo going on in my shop. We have refined that mission over time, and really since the mid-90s have focused completely on early care and education, career development, professional development, and systems of support for teachers working with young children all across the state. And we continue to do that work today. We could not have done any of it without our partners. And our strongest partner, I would have to say, one of our strongest partners that was not at the table before the mid-90s was Early Childhood Higher Ed. And Christine's work with the Early Childhood Higher Ed Consortium and other people in this room has been instrumental in moving this whole thing forward, and we have some terrific leaders in that group. There have been many other great partners, the Child Care Resource and Referral Network that Kelly spoke of, state government, early childhood professional organizations who are absolutely passionate about young children and how young children learn differently than older children in elementary school, and how integral to their learning and their growth and development their families are. So we really have focused on this whole issue of professional development and early childhood education. And because of that roadmap through our career path, through the practitioner registry, which is really a teacher certification program for early childhood, and through the knowledge base that we've created, through the early learning standards that we've facilitated the writing of, we really have created a roadmap for people who choose to work with young children and families to be successful in their careers. And we've done that by providing them with step-by-step advancement in the field from a very entry level all the way up to higher education. So we've seen scores of individuals who have worked very, very hard to get their bachelor's degrees or advanced degrees in early childhood and to go on and lead the way in our state. That doesn't mean our work is done. There are scores more out there who are dying to go to college and complete their degrees and get their master's degrees. And so it's very exciting to hear about some of the things that are happening that we're able to help facilitate at the Early Childhood Project to help people realize their dreams of really working with young children and families. So many of those people have gone back to school as non-traditional learners with families of their own while they've been working full-time in early childhood programs. I don't know how they've done it. I really don't. And when they get those degrees, they go back out to their communities to create programs for young children and families. And they're, on the average, this is a Montana figure, earning $9.34 an hour less than a kindergarten teacher with a similar degree. We've heard this is a crisis in Montana, it's a crisis in our country, and we have to do something about that. I want someone else to come up with a business model to help us figure this out, because I don't know how we can continue to go on with the compensation issues and the disparity in wages between public school teachers and early childhood teachers. I'm gonna share a quote from a very, very recently published report out of study of higher education, early childhood higher education. And here's the quote: "The sobering reality that early childhood education majors currently face the lowest lifetime earnings among all college graduates suggests that delivering the promise of high-quality early learning opportunities will also require identifying and mobilizing a sustainable, dedicated source of public funding to upgrade the compensation of those who care for and educate young children." So, this is a really tough problem. And we have some promising practices going on with the Montana Preschool Development Grant, because those are creating partnerships with our Head Start programs. And as part of the grant, the wisdom of our authors of that grant was that we need to compensate the teachers in the Head Start programs equally to the teachers in the public school programs for that grant. So that is a step forward. I think that we can solve this problem. My pitch to you today is that early childhood education really needs to be recognized as its own professional field of practice. And it's easy for me to say that because decades ago, like I told you, I got my degree in early childhood education. But that means really defining a knowledge base and holding our teachers to that knowledge base and rewarding them for getting their degrees and communicating to the larger public about what that means. And I think our keynote speaker was just eloquent in describing the technical skills and knowledge it takes to really do a good job of helping young children develop and grow in the ways that we need them to and we want them to be successful in school and in life. So I think we're doing that. I think the Early Childhood Project is honored to be involved in the Preschool Development Grant. I think it's a good start. And I think someone else mentioned today that we were able to give 54 full-on tuition fee scholarships to teachers who are pursuing the new early childhood education preschool through third grade endorsement in the state of Montana, just adopted July 1st, 2015. That is such good news for Montana that we have that teacher endorsement. And not only are we giving scholarships for that, we're also giving full-on scholarships for people enrolled in the University of Montana's brand spanking new early childhood education graduate degree program. We have been sending our Montanans out of state for early childhood education graduate degrees for a number of years, very painful to do, and now we don't have to do that anymore. And I'm also very excited to tell you that Montana State University is working on a graduate degree in child and family studies that will complement exactly what's going on over at the University of Montana. So we are building leadership. It's critically important that we get students, even with advanced degrees, into the field to lead the way after I'm gone. So anyhow, our data really mirrors what's going on nationally about our teachers. And and right now with center-based lead teachers, early childhood education teachers all across the state, only 29% of them on the registry in Montana have bachelor's degrees. So we have a lot of work to do, and we're heading in the right direction. Christine spoke of the Institute of Medicine and National Research Council report that came out in April of 2015. It's called Transforming the Workforce for Children Birth to Age 8, a Unifying Foundation. And it's pretty controversial, but they make 12 recommendations. Don't read the report, it's 400 pages. Oh my gosh. Read the summary, 12 very concise, clear recommendations about where we're going in early childhood education. And Ellen, our keynote speaker, hit this as well. And we are moving in a direction, as Head Start has led the way, that our lead teachers must have bachelor's degrees to do this important work if we're going to see the child outcomes that we're looking for in early childhood education. This really isn't new stuff. I know we talk a lot about the brain research and all of that, but decades ago, I learned all of this stuff about child development and family engagement and how important it is for young children. What's really new is the urgency that has come to this issue in Montana across the country, because a whole lot of other people outside of the field of early childhood education, including economists and business leaders, now recognize the importance of what we're doing and what the research is telling us about child growth and development and early learning. So I am going to go to shared vision very quickly. We all want the best for our young children and families in Montana, and it takes a lot for us to deliver on that vision. And it takes all of us in this room and all of our partners and all of our teachers and our school districts and everyone to make that happen. So I am very hopeful that what we're doing is challenging hard work, at which people have said a number of times today. But I really know that we're up to the challenge. And is it perfect? Is everything that's going on with the Montana Preschool Development Grant perfect? Absolutely not. Is everything that we're doing at the Early Childhood Project perfect? Absolutely not. But we are on a course that will take us where we want to go. And I loved Ellen's goal of 2030. We're talking 5, 10, 15, 20 years out that we're going to be able to really deliver on the promises and the vision that we all share for Montanans. I think that we are literally gasping for breath in our field to try to give families and with young children the support they need to juggle work, life, family life, going to school, all of the things that we're asking them to do. And generally, I think our families are really stressed out. And so they need every single bit of support that Mary Jane talked about with comprehensive services that Head Start's been doing for years. And so I think that all of the great programs you've heard about today, Stars to Quality, Preschool Development Grant, the Launch Grant that's focusing on social emotional development in young children, and promising practices with coaching in the Preschool Development Grant and in Stars to Quality programs to give the teachers the support they need to do the best job they can are all really moving us in the right direction. One thing I am very certain of after decades is that there are plenty of young children to go around. And so when we have these conversations that the 4-year-olds are all going to go to the public schools or whatever, there's plenty of young children out there who need care and education, high quality care and education. And as things shift and move around, that they're certainly doing in Montana and our local communities, that's okay. It's scary and it's messy, but it's time, and I think that the shifts that have been described by many of our panelists today are uncomfortable. But sometimes that dissonance, cognitive dissonance, that discomfort that we have, the tensions that we're feeling, we just need to go with it, and to build relationships and to talk to each other and to collaborate to make this work for kids and families. I have seen, so I'm going to talk about our values real quickly, that in Montana, we share just so many common values and shared missions about what we want for our kids. And over the years, we have done wonderful, creative, innovative things over and over again in this state. And I'm absolutely confident that we're going to do it again as we expand early childhood education and the programs and services for young children in our state. And the reason why we're going to do it is because our children are still waiting. So, thank you.
Oh, thanks, Libby. I'm not quite so sure I can be quite that impassioned, but I'm going to, well, first of all, I want to thank the Wheeler Center for the invitation. It's good to see my fellow panelists again. We've seen each other off and on since some work that we did together, and I appreciate the opportunity to be here. Billings is home for me. My parents and my 3 sisters all live here, so, and I've been here since Wednesday doing some other business, so it's always a pleasure to be back here. I haven't been in the Northern. I told a story I won't share about the Northern when I lived here and I was long ago far away in high school, but this is an awesome facility, and so I appreciate the opportunity to be here. I'm going to start what you might think in is perhaps a rather unusual place. So at OPI, we do K-12 education, and we have great folks, early childhood specialists like Terry Barkley and Tara Farrader-Smith. And, you know, the fact that both of those are on staff at OPI is an indication of Superintendent Juneau's commitment to be part of this conversation and part of moving forward into the future. We have one math specialist. We have one science specialist. We have one English language arts specialist. We have one library media specialist. We have 2 early childhood specialists. So it's just part of her commitment. But here's one thing we know about ourselves. We are not all things preschool, and we are not going to be all things preschool. And I would hope that you would not expect us to be all things preschool as we move into the future in Montana. Superintendent Juneau, Denise, expects us to be part of the fabric of preschool across the state and to play our role and to play it appropriately. And one of the things that I've gotten from today is that it's a whole bunch of us. And in my mind, because I work at that policy level and trying to move levers and try and make the needle move, the more I know about who else is trying to do the same thing, and I know about what their expertise might be, and I know where their foundation is, whether it's from funding or it's philosophical or if it's from private sector or somewhere else in the public sector that we've never heard of, the better we are to do what we do really well in Montana, and that's to be a community around an important issue like this one. So we know our place. We know that if it's going to happen in the public schools, we know how to help make that happen. The other thing that we have in our office is influence. But we don't have the money, and we don't have all of the ability to make all of the decisions, and nor do we want it. One of the things that I've seen, being around for almost 4 decades in public education, and I'll swipe a couple of years off of that and throw them on how long I've been at OPI, but nonetheless, is one of the things that I've seen when I've done this is that we've taken an opportunity, at least in terms of our role being part of something bigger, to do it in a way from our office that we've never done it before. And I would speak particularly about the development of the standards in Chapter 63. You've heard folks talk about Chapter 63, which is titled Preschool Education. Chapter 57 is about licensure, and Chapter 58. And Chapter 58, just the concept that at the K-12 end of education or on the K-12 side of education, we develop program goals for higher education. And so we've asked the experts in higher education to come talk to us. That's kind of unusual in this country. But 58 is so that the higher ed programming, and now we've got that piece and it's in there, and we've tied it to licensure in 57. But when I look at 63, we did some things that are pretty unusual. And again, I did what I could in the background to use it as an opportunity. So I went back and looked, and there's more than a half a dozen people in this room that know those standards better than I and why they are the way they are. But I want to talk about a couple of pieces around why they're different. So class size. Here's some of the titles of some of the parts in chapter 63. Procedures, definitions, leadership. It was very intentional to ensure that school leaders, if it's preschool is going to happen in a public school, that school leaders are engaged in that. And that it doesn't turn into, is that thing down the hall that's new and, I don't know a lot about it. That's not good enough. They need to be fully engaged with preschool programming if it occurs in the public schools. Teacher assignment and qualifications. We even talk about paraprofessionals. What are the qualifications if we're going to have paraprofessionals in these classrooms? It's different. You know better than I do. It's different than being in that first grade classroom. It's an awful lot different than being in that second grade classroom. My wife's a paraprofessional in Helena in a second grade classroom. And I know she'd love to be in a preschool classroom, but it is completely different. And you know that better than I do. Class size. So I don't know if you remember Ellen's numbers. I saw like 15 and 20s. Here's how the standards are for public schools in Montana. And again, there was some confusion. These standards I'm talking about only apply to preschools that are found in a public school. They're not standards for Head Start. They're not standards for somebody who's running a private program. Only in a public school, okay? So you got to have a properly licensed and endorsed teacher for the first 10 kids. As soon as the 11th student's enrolled in that classroom, you got to put another adult in there. On the 11th. And they at least have to be a paraprofessional that meets the qualifications under these rules. Could be another licensed and endorsed teacher, but you got to put another adult in there. And at the 19th student, you have to start another class. And there was some disagreement, and it took a little work to get to where we are on that. But let me tell you how it is in first grade. In grades K1 and 2, the maximum is 20, except for every student over 20 up to 24, you can add a para. So really, what's the maximum size of a first, second, or kindergarten classroom? It's 24, but you put another adult in there. And we didn't do that. We didn't use that model, that method in the preschool classrooms. And look at the number, 10, and now you put another adult in that classroom. Aggregate hours, it's similar to what we've done at other grade levels, but one of the things that's happened in the recent past is that we've made some changes into how we did aggregate hours. And what we've said is, and this needed to happen for a couple of reasons. One is that if funding ever does come from the legislature and it flows through OPI to the schools, that funding, and it comes on a per pupil basis to a very large degree. We have to have this aggregate hour thing in place. But what we've done is we've left it on an annual basis. We don't tell you how many hours a day you have to do it. We don't tell you how many days in the school year you have to do it. What we say is you have to have at least 720 aggregate hours within some time frame if you're going to put together that program. And there's some great sideboards, and there's an awful lot, I think, of great research behind this, because I was listening to Ellen speak, and so many things that she was saying, I go, oh, yeah, we're doing that. And it's not because of anything at my level, it's because of folks like that and our staff. Head Start was at the table. We had people who have public school, preschool programs at the table as well. And they used best practices. They used standards that already exist as the guideline. So we did a lot of things. Enrollment eligibility, today it's this 5 honor before September 10th, and we mixed that up a little bit as well and said, here's an opportunity. How should we do that? What's the best way to go about doing that? And the fact that we did that, I think, speaks volumes. Here's one of the things I know about generating these standards. And technically, these are called the Administrative Rules of Montana. You may have seen them referred to as ARM. Okay, they have the weight of law. Here's one of the things that, for the time I've been at OPI, that I've learned about them. We never get it right the first time. But we have also rarely come back and made adjustments. So I'm challenging you. I'm challenging my colleagues at the table that as this moves forward and we start to implement these standards, when they need to be adjusted, engage and get them adjusted. Go to the Board of Public Ed. If you can't get the support of the state superintendent, you would get the support of Denise Juneau today, but we're not in office after 2016. So if you can't get the support of the state superintendent, whoever follows her, go directly to the Board of Public Education and get them to adjust the rules so that they work. We get really close, and we all do our very best to get as close as we can. We've never gotten it right the first time, and like I said, we've rarely gone back and made the adjustments that we should have. This is too important to not do that as we move forward. My final comments, because so much has already been said, I'm going to wrap it up and talk a little bit about the demography of Montana, and then talk about something that we've done that we would really encourage you to consider as we move this thing forward, since we're talking about how do we get to where we are today, from where we are today to where we want to go tomorrow. This may seem like an odd thing to say sitting in Billings, but Montana's a rural state. And there were a couple of researchers back in 2012. One of them actually is from Great Falls, young man Chris Losey and his colleague Jennifer Davis. They collected all of these metrics around rurality, and they brought them together, and they chose 5 of them that they thought, if we use these 5 as the filter, it really does a good job of casting the net widely enough. And interestingly, Superintendent Juneau was hosting a rural state chiefs conference at Big Sky, and there were about 15 states in the room. And there were some preliminary activities and some presentations and speeches, and then Chris and Jennifer got up and they showed their collection of the metrics and the collection of the 5 they used, and they created this cross index. And for all 5 of those, Montana hit the mark every single time as a rural state. FCC Chairman Wheeler was here with Senator Tester not long ago, and I had the opportunity to meet with them. And I always take the opportunity to make this clear. Every state has rural locales. Not every state is a rural state. And we have to operate, if we want to be successful in Montana, from that perspective, that this is a rural state. Let me give you an example that I use quite often. So I have to look at my notes because I've been around in the business for 40 years, and I get these percentages mixed up quite easily. 70% of the 143,000 public school students in the state of Montana, 70% of them go to 20% of our schools. I call them the Big 12. If you think athletics and the AA schools, so that's going to be that 7, and then it's the next 5 largest communities. But the flip of that is true also. 30% of the children in this state go to 80% of our schools. When our office does work at the federal level or the national level, whether it be that public side of the federal or we do some work actually on the private side, and Superintendent Juneau is fabulous at getting private funding for some of her initiatives like Graduation Matters Montana. I don't know if Mike Halligan's still here, thanks to the Washington Foundation. Excuse me for that. I just can't emphasize that point enough. And it was, so we're sitting in Big Sky, and Of course, 10 of those state chiefs went, oh, well, so what are we doing here? And Larry Shumway, who was the state superintendent in Utah at the time, was sitting next to me, and he said, you know, I kind of get that. Southern Utah probably has a more sparse population than eastern Montana if you draw a line from Havre and go straight south and then go east. Southern Utah is probably more sparsely populated than eastern Montana. But Larry said to me, he said, 95% of the public school kids in the state of Utah live within 95 miles of my office in Salt Lake City. We don't have a Salt Lake City corridor in Montana. So we are who we are. A lot of my colleagues at the office say, well, there's more cattle in Montana than there are kids. There's 18 times more cattle in Montana than there are public school kids. Connecticut has 100 public school students per square mile. We have less than 1. Okay, so we always come from this perspective of we are who we are. And as Early Ed started to move forward, and we were working with the governor's office, we got all these great experts together, and we got together and we worked on those 3 chapters in administrative rule, and I'm so proud of the work that they did. But some of those early adopters from around the state, like we lost Dan Zorn, who was an assistant superintendent in Kalispell. Dan was calling me and he said, Dennis, so how are we going to make this happen? I'm on board. You don't have to sell me on early childhood. I want to know how we're going to make it happen in Kalispell. And I said, first of all, I said, Dan, don't assume that you're it. Move slow, bring stakeholders together in your community, find out what you have, find out what's missing, talk with parents, even those who don't normally have a voice in your community, and find out what the needs are, and then move forward in that regard. And he started to do that, and then he went to Washington. So I can't take that exact same model and go to Ekalaka, because the economy of scale is much different. But here's one of the things that we've learned from Graduation Matters Montana. If we take best practices to communities and we take data that we know is really germane to what the topic is, and Graduation Matters Montana was graduation rates and dropout rates. If we go in there and we take experts and best practices with us when we go in there, and then we find out who the leaders are in the community, and we build some synergy around the topic with those people, and we can engage the entire community and go through a process similar to what I described happened in Kalispell, but make it fit in Ekalaka and Libby and Billings and Laurel and Huntley and Havre. And then at the state level, continue to provide support. It happens. And it happens successfully. And so I'd leave you with my last challenge is if we move forward together, that we do it one community at a time. We can't build all the answers and we can't have the magic formula at the state level, but we can have resources and we can have assistance, and we have plenty of expertise in this state, and we know where to go if we don't have answers to some of our questions out of Montana. But we do it one community at a time and make it work in each one of those communities. Thanks.
Okay, so at this point, before too many people need an afternoon siesta, this is your opportunity to engage a bit with one another. The way this is going to work is that, again, you're going to be working in small groups at each one of those tables. I think in Havre and Missoula, probably there will be one group for each of those sites. Each table has a handout on it. It looks something like this that has a series of questions on it that we'd like to use to do 2 things. We'd like to use that series of questions to kind of guide and frame your conversation. And within each table, each group, you can move through these questions in any order, any fashion you want to. You can address all of them. You can address them in any order you want to. You can focus on a handful, however that makes most sense to you. But these are just a sort of a seed. or a catalyst to begin your conversation. The second thing, though, that we'd like to have you do with these questions is for each of you individually to use these forms, this sheet, to capture some of your notes. What we'd like to do at the end of the session today, if you're willing, is to collect those from you, because that information becomes data. It becomes information and feedback that we can collect and compile and make available to stakeholders, policymakers, decision makers, and so forth. We have a really great, diverse group of participants here and at the satellite sites. We'd like to take advantage of that, take advantage of the knowledge and the perspective that you bring to the room, and collect that and begin to share it, to continue the conversation that's been started today. So please take some notes. Within each of your groups, please select a recorder/reporter that will be responsible for identifying the top 2 or 3 things and sort of sharing that. What are the top issues, the top concerns that you spent your time talking about? I'm going to give you about 20 to maybe 25 minutes, probably closer to 20 minutes, to have these conversations, collect some information. So at the end of that 20 minutes, whoever is your recorder should be prepared to give a little feedback. We'll do that kind of round robin. I don't know that we're going to have time to go through every single table. For the groups that are in Missoula and Havre, you can send your themes to the email address that we gave you before the beginning of this session. We have that information or can get access to it here on the laptop that we've got available to us. Use this 20 minutes also if you need to take a break. This is a good time to do it. Once we come back together, we'll continue on through kind of the end of this session. So about 20 minutes, small groups. Makes sense? You guys know what your task is? All right, have at it.